Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 282. This week, I'm talking with Debra Amick about her son, Chase, a gifted artist and musician whose creativity touched thousands of people. Debra describes him as an old soul, a peacemaker, and someone who always saw the world in unique ways. In this first part of our conversation, Debra shares about Chase's early years, the emergence of mental health struggles in his teens, and the heartbreaking night he went to heaven. She also reflects on the decision she and her husband made to stay closely connected to his heart, the miracle of Chase coming back to faith in Jesus, and the unexpected comfort God provided in the days that followed his death. I think you'll find comfort in hearing how Debra learned to trust the God who still holds every thread of her story. This is a two-part conversation, so be sure to come back next week to hear some very practical anchors that gave Debra strength in the fog of her grief. But for now, just sit back and listen in. Hi, Debra. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi, Jill. Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you. I have really been looking forward to our visit today. I want to give you an opportunity, first of all, to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
Great. So I live in the Atlanta, Georgia area. My husband and I have been here about 27 years. Prior to that, I lived in several places, Orlando, Chicago, Tennessee. But we call this home now and love it. I've been married to my husband for 34 years. He was my high school crush. We have two children. Our daughter just turned 30 and got married within the same week. And so that happened with about 3 weeks ago. So we've been real busy. She lives an hour from us. And so we're so grateful for that. And so now we have a son in love that we love. And we have a cat and a dog. And my husband is a mental health therapist. I'm a registered nurse who spent many years in critical care, open heart recovery, raising and homeschooling kids. And then when they were a little older, transitioned into healthcare leadership and ultimately helped to lead quality improvement efforts for a large health system here in the Atlanta area. And that was really gratifying. And then after losing our son, Chase, and that happened within 14 months of losing both of my parents, God started reawakening dreams that I had put on the back burner, thinking I would get to them someday. And I started realizing, wow, there's a very good chance if I don't actually get after what I believe God's called me to do, I might never. So 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago, started writing, speaking, and coaching women who had gone through loss to help them dare to dream again with God and move from pain to purpose.
I love that. It's such a beautiful thing when God takes the pain in our lives and brings purpose from it. And we'll be talking about that in our conversation today.
Great.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. So we're here today to talk about Chase, your son. Take a few minutes and tell us about him. Help us get to know him a little bit.
Sure. So Chase he was born an old soul. He had loads and loads of emotional intelligence. He was such a peacemaker in the family. And not that we have that much contention, but there would be times where I would see him pulling his older sister aside and like coaching her on how she could speak with me to help, me understand her viewpoint. And this is when he was like 8 years old. And he would do the same thing, with others of us in the family. He was very artistic, very entrepreneurial from a young age. He would sometimes get in the car after he started going to school with $10 or $20. And we're like, what in the world? What happened? And he would have sketched a picture and then auctioned it at school. And
Oh, wow.
so he started very young as an entrepreneur. He was also, he always looked for unique ways to accomplish things. So he did not typically go on a straight path. And even from the time he was little, and I'd say, what would you like to drink for breakfast? It was like, I would like some milk with a splash of orange juice mixed in. It was just never straightforward.
Sure.
And that really kind of came to fruition as he became older, and he ended up pursuing music and art. And so he became an artist and a musician. So, I mean, that's just, he ended up inspiring millions of people actually with his art and music, and
Wow.
was very prolific before he passed away when he was 21.
Yeah. Chase is an unusual name. Is there a story behind his name? How you chose that name?
There's really not.
Oh,
No, his first name, he's named after my husband, Ronald.
okay.
And the story is just so basic. We were at a Taco Bell after a gynecology appointment, an OBGYN, where
Sure.
we found out he was a boy, and we sat there and decided Ronald Chase would be his name. So nothing epic. No.
Right. Right. I bet he enjoyed that name though. It's a cool name for a young man.
Yes, he did like it. It was interesting, though, in the months right before he passed away, he occasionally was starting to go by Ronald, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Very old fashioned for his age. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about his story, about what happened with him?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mentioned that Chase had a lot of emotional intelligence and was
Yeah.
a very, very feeling person. We could tell that from the time he was very young. He was also very, very shy. He was the
Hmm.
shyest kid I ever met, ever was around when he was little.
Really? Yeah.
Yes, very shy. And then he kind of blossomed into a quiet leader. So with his classmates, and even in our homeschooling group when we were homeschooling, he was just kind of a quiet leader that people wanted to emulate. And we noticed in middle school, around 12, 13, that he was getting a little more withdrawn. He was seeming a little bit sad. And so we took him to a counselor, and, nothing much came of that. But, and then when he was 16, we actually, at that point, he was pulling away from some of the morals and things that he
Mm,
had been taught.
sure.
We found out about that in kind of a dramatic way. We didn't have any idea that he had been recording music and putting it online. And when I found out, he'd only been doing it about 3 months, but he had already gained quite a following, and was actually being courted by record companies and things
Wow.
like that. So it was shocking. And the music was shocking. So it was a very tumultuous, hard time in our lives. My mother had just had a small stroke, and we were trying to move her out of things. And I'm, helping to lead a healthcare organization. And so it was a lot going on. And my husband and I had a real, decision inflection point to make. And we decided, with so much prayer and seeking God on our faces, for how to proceed, that God was telling us to stay really close to Chase's heart.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so that is what we endeavored to do. And I'm so
Sure.
glad that that's the decision that we made.
Yes.
Um, we did, have some ground rules that we laid down, but at that point, he could have, moved on his own. And so it was an interesting time period. And then I started noticing slightly concerning things that he would say. And I would think, man, that just doesn't sound like Chase. I'm not quite
Mm.
sure what's going on. He was still living at home. And it was Memorial Day weekend when he was 17 that he had a psychotic break. And it was terrifying. I'd
Sure.
never encountered anything like that, even though I've been in healthcare. I've worked with a lot of people in ICU who were what we call in Georgia being 1013 or involuntarily committed.
Hmm.
But to see that happen to your son, who's only 17 years old, and I have a longstanding history in my family of mental illness. And
Mm.
so my mother was bipolar, was hospitalized several times with suicidal ideation. And my aunt had bipolar, my grandfather, a cousin. It ran deep.
Sure.
And so it was clear that our son was very manic. He was not sleeping. He was completely out of touch with reality. But with it being Memorial Day weekend, it was very hard to get help.
Sure.
So, long story short, we ended up taking him to a psych facility. And I am not saying this in any way disparaging against psych facilities because I know how overwhelmed they are being in
Sure.
the healthcare system. But basically, they said, we can take him, but he will be locked up for 24 hours and unmedicated before he can see a psychiatrist. And we were by his side every minute of the day at that point and having to verbally coach him constantly. So fortunately, we had found a psychiatrist who would take him. That's a whole nother story of days of calling, trying to find someone. And that man really, the psychiatrist became such a lifeline for
Mm.
us. He was wonderful and amazing. So that began a very incredibly hard period for Chase. He was terrified. It was terrifying for us. And his, cycles weren't very rapid.
Mm.
But when he would get extremely manic, if his medication wasn't tailored just right, which it typically wasn't, then he would also have extreme depression too
Mm.
mixed in with that. He ended up hospitalized one time when he was out in California. And that was, again, not disparaging our healthcare system, but it ended up being an incredibly traumatic experience for him
Mm.
and for me. So, what I will say is that during that time, he was making music, being courted by record companies. Actually, at that point, had signed with a record company before he was hospitalized. And my husband and I were taking turns traveling with him to stay connected to his heart
Sure.
and help keep him safe.
Yeah.
And so I was praying so much, especially getting on the plane to fly out to California when he was hospitalized, and just really crying out to God to give me the words to say. And God was incredibly faithful in really guiding me in exactly what to say when I was able to see Chase. And it was a miracle of sorts took place a few weeks after that when Chase got out of the hospital and we were able to bring him home and he was living back here with us. And no, actually, he was still living in an apartment at that point. But I had taken him to a psychiatry appointment and we went to lunch afterwards. And my husband and I had just started attending a new church that was very supportive and a
Mm.
place where the walking wounded can go to heal, which is how we felt at that
Mm.
point.
Mhm.
And the Lord probably told me 10 times during that lunch with Chase, invite him to church, invite him to church. And I'm really like, God, are you sure? He just got out of the hospital. I'm not sure this is the best timing.
Right. Yeah.
But I did. And Chase said, yes, I would like to go. So we picked him up that day, went to church, and there was a minister visiting from another state who was speaking. And I have never heard another minister, I've never heard another sermon where they talked about bipolar disorder from the pulpit, but he did.
Wow.
And he talked about mental illness and asked, people who were suffering to stand, and Chase did. And I basically was praying during that time and said, God, I really don't want to leave this church unless that man prays for my son. And so, but of course we needed Chase's, consent, and he agreed. And the man prayed for him. And as he prayed, if you've ever heard the term like read his mail, he read Chase's mail, didn't know him, never laid
Sure.
eyes on him before, but he said things about Chase that there was no way he could have known. So we knew that God was speaking to him. And one thing that he said to Chase is, you're going to testify to your generation about the
Mhm.
goodness of God.
Mhm.
And so about 3 weeks later, Chase came back to the Lord in a very beautiful way and started attending church, and really started, his music turned much more positive. And it was very interesting because so many of the kids who listened to him were really struggling with depression and with feeling like an outcast. And so many people have spoken of Chase in terms of being a positive influence on their lives.
Mm.
And I feel like that time frame, even though he wasn't overtly speaking about God in his music, it was much more positive.
Sure.
Not 100% what I would have loved, but he was on a better trajectory.
Yeah.
So basically, during that time, we kept trying to get his medication right, but he would still go through psychotic episodes, sometimes lasting like a week. And my husband and I, during those times, would take off work, not leave his side, sleep with him,
Mhm. Sure.
in fact, I would sleep with him and my husband would sleep outside the door in
Wow.
case I didn't hear him get up. And so I started really seeking other options because I felt like God had so much more for him. This wasn't how he wanted him, to live.
Mhm.
And we heard about Dr. Amen. I don't know if you've heard of him. He is a neuro psychiatrist in California who has clinics, and one of them is in Atlanta. And he does brain scans on people. It's not covered by insurance, but we decided to go ahead and do that, and Chase agreed. So we got Chase brain scans, and unfortunately, we didn't get the results of those until after he passed away.
Mm.
And I'll talk about what that showed in a little bit. But the month before Chase passed away, he had a very long, very difficult psychotic episode, again, about a week. And he stabilized somewhat after that, and had a fairly good month. And then at the end of the month, had another psychotic episode. And again, still, he would intermittently take himself off his medication, even though we
Mm,
were trying to monitor it and, all kinds of things. But
sure.
he was very health conscious and, juicing and getting sunlight. And he'd be in nature a lot and trying all kinds of ways to try to fix his mind. And so basically what happened is that he was doing much better after the last psychotic episode that he had. And by that, I would say probably 75% better, like not
Hmm.
totally, but I felt like I could be in a different room, and he was safe.
Sure.
And then the night that he passed away, my daughter and I were in the living room with him, and we had a conversation. And he said a few things that it was like we could tell he wasn't totally checked in with reality. But he said, I really think I need to go for a walk. And we know how much he loves nature and what he loved walking. And
Sure.
so we let him leave the house. And then my daughter and I called my husband. He was upstairs and he came down, and the three of us we talked about it. We said, should we go look for him? But from our house, there's so many ways
Mm,
that he could have gone.
sure.
And, it was like, we know he's probably just clearing his mind, and we feel like he was well enough at that point to be okay. So we all ended up praying for him then.
Mm,
And right after that, I was laying on the couch, and I felt God say, then I want you to start praising me. So I started praising God, lifted my hands, and was praising God under my breath. And as I waited for Chase to get home, I was filling out the paperwork for the mental health clinic where he had brain scans because we were going for his follow-up visit. So I was filling that out, and then fell asleep on the couch. And when I woke up, there were policemen at the door,
mm,
and my husband had gone down to get them. And after what seemed like an eternity, they told us that Chase had fallen from a building. And it was like 3 stories tall. We found out later that he went there often with his friends to look at stars at night.
mhm. Sure.
And it also looked like he loved to do stretching exercises, and he would always take his shirt off and his shoes off. And it looked like he was doing that. So we do not know if he intended to fall. We don't know if he was thinking he could fly or whatever. So that's what happened. And I'm going to circle back to, I know we can unpack more there, but,
Mhm.
of course, as all parents who have lost a child, there were so many questions
Oh,
that
sure.
I had. One of the questions, though, and there were many, 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 one of the questions was, man, God, that man who prayed for him
Yes.
and said that Chase would testify of God's love. Like, that's so strange that didn't happen. But interestingly, Chase had fully recorded and finished an album that was ready to be launched. And so he had done several others, but we had to decide, are we going to release that?
Mhm.
And so we felt that it was in the best interest of his fans and people who were grieving for him to go ahead and release it. And a news company reached out to us that's like a news magazine for music. And they said, we did an interview with Chase, and we would like to release the interview at the time that the album comes out. And so we said, well, let us see what it is. And in the interview, at that point, while he mentioned some things about spirituality that he felt were hard when he was growing up, he also said, I've really come to believe that Jesus is my Savior,
Wow.
and how much Jesus had made an impact in his life. And so that was just a very interesting, not, of course, not what we were expecting, way that Chase testified about Jesus.
Hmm.
Of course, that brought us that, along with many other conversations and things that let us know that Chase had a personal relationship with Jesus.
Yeah. What a
Yeah.
gift that is. What a
Yeah.
blessing, an unexpected blessing
Yes.
that you guys had there. Ah, that's a special gift. I love how you made the choice, the decision to stay connected to his heart. As a parent, when your child is going through struggles like that and maybe making choices that you don't agree with and getting involved with different things, the choice you made to stay connected to his heart, I just think is so special and made such a difference in the way you walked out this journey with him.
Well, it did. It really did. And my husband and I are truly eternally grateful.
Yeah,
Um, that being said, I know that everyone's journey is different. And there are
sure.
times that, I think that the Lord may lead to have very solid boundaries and to kind of move through things in a different way. So I think it's so personal, but God
Right.
made it very clear to us that that's what he wanted us to do. Yeah.
Yes, like you said, it's not the same for everyone,
Mm-mm.
but this for your son and for your
Yes,
family, this was clearly the right decision.
yeah,
And to know that he did come back to the Lord
yes,
is
yeah.
such a gift. Um, that's wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing all of that with us. That is a blessing. You mentioned that Chase had had a brain scan and that you were going to tell us a little bit about the results. What did you find out from that scan?
So we found out a few key things that would have changed the type of treatment he was receiving.
Wow.
Um, and the first was that he had evidence of traumatic brain injury that had gone undiagnosed, mainly because in psychiatry and in mental health, it's not common. It's typically not covered by insurance to actually look at the affected organ.
Sure.
But so that was something that was very startling. And then another thing that I found out later, and being a nurse and being part of the healthcare system, I know that a lot of our treatment protocols are based on when diseases pop up. So it's less preventative. But in my own life, I ended up having a genetic test done that showed that I did not process B vitamins in a normal way. It's called the MTHFR gene.
Hmm.
And as I did a little research on it, I also found that that is very common in people with bipolar and schizophrenia. And so while I don't know for sure if Chase had that or not, there were a few things that have given my husband and I a lot of food for thought, as he's in mental health and me having been in healthcare, just ways that we may try to work with other people in the future to help them proactively get some answers that
Mhm.
could change outcomes.
As we close this first part of my conversation with Debra Amick, I'm so appreciative of the courage and honesty she's shown in sharing Chase's story. Her journey reminds us that even when our grip feels weak, God's hand never lets go. Next week, Debra will share what happened after Chase went to heaven, how she began writing and speaking about her experience, and how God used that step of obedience to help others in their pain. She'll also talk about 4 anchors that steadied her in the fog of grief, practical, faith-based truths that point us back to the one who holds every thread together. If this episode encouraged you, I hope you'll share it with another grieving parent who might need to hear Debra's story. And as always, thank you for joining me for the While We're Waiting podcast, where we trust God together in the midst of our sorrow and look forward with hope to the day we're reunited with our children in heaven.